We're addicted to our own limitations. We're only feeding in the lower vibration. Watering the static of distorted frequency, oscillating currents of erratic energy. Rise a little higher to correct this cosmology. Escape the boundary of temporality. Liberate your soul from this material. Meditate, follow away this knowledge is the path to infinity. We're addicted to our own limitations. We're only feeding in the lower vibration. Watering the static of distorted frequency, oscillating currents of erratic energy. Rise a little higher to correct this cosmology. Escape the boundary of temporality. Liberate your soul from this material. Meditate, follow away this knowledge is the path to infinity.
All right. Welcome to the B Stream with me, Karen B, and my guest today is Mario Garza. Welcome, Mario. It's such a pleasure to meet you, by the way. First time we've talked.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the invite to Flattoberfest. I'm really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I wanted to have you on today to kind of get to know you and get your story and you can tell me and, all of my viewers and possible Flattoberfest attendees about yourself, kind of a
Sure,
get to know you type of thing.
definitely.
Yeah. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself at first?
Yeah, no problem. So my project, for people who are unaware, is called Symbolic Studies. Symbolicstudies.com is my site. You can find all my links there. I'm all over the place, YouTube and Instagram and things like that. What I mainly do these days is produce content around symbolism. And I really focus a lot on signs that are the astrological signs. This was like kind of a foundation for me wanting to know more about astrology and kind of what the constellations represent and things like that. I started this project because I got really interested in symbolism probably in like 2008, 2010, something like that. I'm a lifelong artist. I've been a graphic designer for 25 years. And over that time, I've designed so many different things. So logos, and I've done album covers and t-shirts and posters, and I've done skate decks and things like that. And so I kind of refined my eye over time. And because I always worked with like shapes and icons and things like that, I became interested in like, what do these things actually mean? And so I didn't realize it when I first started doing design work, but over the years, I found that there are like symbolic dictionaries and symbolic reference books and
Hmm.
things like that, that you can really make a study out of learning what the different colors mean. You can make a study out of what all of the numbers mean and, the different shapes and whatnot. So I started purchasing those books, and I just started just really, really diving into it. And at some point, I found the tarot, and the tarot really opened me up to astrology and numerology and all sorts of other things. And it was kind of love at first sight, to be honest with you. So ever since then, I just got really interested in esoteric symbolism and occultism and, magic and things like that. And I got really interested in kind of occult history and the different sort of groups and mystery schools and lodge systems that were out there and what they were teaching and kind of like religious studies in a way and what the different religions out there, what were their symbols, what did they think they actually meant and everything else. And at one point in time, around 2014, 2015, I started questioning heliocentrism and was reading work by like Eric Dubay at the time and things like that. And I was following his blog, by the way, before he even mentioned anything about flat Earth, like at all. And so when he first mentioned it, I was really surprised that this was sort of a thing that he was publishing work around.
You were following
Um,
Eric Dubay before he got into flat Earth?
before he published anything about flat Earth. Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think I've talked to anybody else who can say that, or at least I've never
Yeah.
heard anybody say that.
Yeah. He had a blog. I think it's called the Atlantean Conspiracy or something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he was talking about like Freemasonry and he was talking about symbolism and, the occult and things like that. And so I was following him for at least maybe like half a year or a year. And so I was kind of familiar with his posts. And then he put out his first post about it. And I was like, whoa, this is completely different. I've never heard anybody ever say anything about this before. And then it wasn't too long after that that he put out his first PDF, the 200 proofs book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I bought that or downloaded it. And I actually was reading it on a plane to India. So late 2014, I believe. I was going to India and I was reading this PDF on an iPad, and it was blowing my mind. And I was reading it in a plane, and I'm like looking out the window, and I'm like, yeah, man, I can't see that curve. I'm like, I'm not seeing it anywhere. And I was looking out the window, and I'm like, this actually kind of feels like we're in some sort of like tank or something, or like some sort of enclosure, something along these lines. I wasn't seeing the curve, and so it really was a paradigm shift, that flight, because that's all I was reading, and I had that view, right?
That's a long
And
flight.
then, yeah, and it's a long flight, exactly right. And then the trippy thing that happened was I landed in India. I was with a buddy, and Indian people are very friendly to Westerners and they're very curious and they want to know if they know that you're not Indian and you're a Western person, they will ask you all sorts of questions. How much money do you make? Where are you from? They're very like forward like that. And we landed, and this young guy approached us like the first day we were there. And he just started talking to us, and I just asked him if he wanted to go get tea or something. So we went to a shop and we started drinking tea, and I was curious about his background and his sort of faith and things like that. Just wanted to get to know him. And literally the first thing he said was that he has a guru and that his guru says that the Earth doesn't spin, and that that Western people have this idea that the Earth is a ball and it spins, and that that's completely backwards.
Hmm.
And so he said his guru literally teaches a geocentric flat Earth model,
Probably
and that
Vedic.
completely blew my mind because I didn't prompt him at all to talk about any of this. And so I told him, I'm like, I'm reading a book about this right now. And he was like, yeah, that's just how it is. And so that really changed the game for me, where I'm like, here's this guy, he's unaware of what's happening online, and he's just saying that this is just how it is. And he even had the awareness that people here in the West had this sort of false construct and all this propaganda and things like that with heliocentrism. So ever since then, I've just been following this material, and what I tell people is it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. You know, geocentrism and questioning heliocentrism for me has been a huge, huge game changer for symbolism too. Because I've noticed that people who decode things symbolically and they only have the heliocentric lens, they're actually kind of seeing things through a false paradigm or through a more modern sort of paradigm.
Hmm.
And when you look at when you look at older cultures and ancient cosmologies and stuff, they didn't have a heliocentric worldview. And so their symbols weren't sun based. And so it's just been a huge foundation for me over the last, 10 years or so, all of this information. And it's really influenced kind of every aspect of my research and, my symbolic sort of work and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. I actually have a lot in common with you. I did graphic design too for a long
Oh, yeah?
time. Yeah, and I worked in print shops, and I did
Mm,
drawing and painting, and I still do that stuff sometimes. But yeah, that's really cool. That's sort of like the background I come from too, is a heavy art background.
gotcha. Okay.
So did you find, like, when you started looking into all these different symbols and stuff, that it was backing up the geocentric point of view too as you went further on from that point on? Did you start to find a lot of stuff to sort of
Yeah, I
corroborate
mean,
that?
basically, yeah, my whole entire like deep weave that I've been pulling at for a number of years now is actually finding out that a lot of symbols that modern authors say are solar, that's a modern interpretation of things. And that was one of the things that kind of, you know, um, bothered me a little bit is buying newer books on symbolism and seeing different symbols be referred to as just it's just a sun sign. It's just a symbol for the sun, and it's a solar sort of symbol or sigil or glyph or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, I don't know if that makes sense to me. I'm like, there has to be more here. It's not just a sun symbol. So even as an example, the swastika. The swastika, if you look in modern symbolic dictionaries, it's not uncommon for them to say that it's a sun wheel or somehow a symbol of the sun. But when you look at older books, they will have more of the accurate interpretation, is that it's actually a symbol that represents the spinning of heaven.
Hmm.
And specifically, it's actually the Big Dipper going around the North Star. It's going around the pole star. And so I've even read authors now who have basically said that that interpretation wasn't even something that was exposed to Westerners and people in Europe for a very, very long time. Like there's basically the Western mindset symbolically tends to be more solar based and a lot of like Eastern symbols. And when you look at kind of like the foundation of these symbols, they're what I refer to as polar. And so there's a huge shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. Polar symbolism is way more in line with geocentrism. And so, with a geocentric perspective, the North Star, the pole star, right,
Hmm.
actually had way more prominence. And I'll say that that's one thing that was a huge gift for me is starting to read a little bit about the pole star, little bit about the North Star. And that to me has been a huge, huge sort of thread of information that I've continued to pull out for a long time. And there's a lot of esoteric information about the North Star, and there's a lot of esoteric information about the dippers. because they revolve closely around that pole star.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what I found is that there were a lot of symbols, and there's actually a lot of deities that were connected to the North Star. They were connected to what's referred to as the world axis or the axis mundi, which is sort of this, it's this central sort of pillar or column that everything sort of revolves around, especially the fixed stars. All you have to do is just look at the North Star, right? And all of
Right.
the fixed stars go around it counterclockwise. And so a lot of symbols actually have to do with this dynamic because my understanding is in the primordial world, people had an earlier sky clock than the sky clock that most people refer to today. So the early sky clock was actually the Big Dipper and Little Dipper going around the pole star. That was the original sky clock. And at some point, people became more sun centric. So then people started focusing actually on the path of the sun and therefore the signs of the zodiac, right? The 12 signs of the zodiac around the path of the sun. And so having this awareness that there was an earlier sky clock that people had a very strong reverence for and had like all of these different cultural connections with was absolutely huge. And having that understanding helped me decode a lot of other symbols and sigils. And I'm like, the root for these symbols actually goes back to sort of the geocentric era when people had a different way of looking at things before the era of sun worship, right? And so that's been a huge thing for me is just kind of trying to wrap my head around this era of sun worship, how the church, played a part in all of that, promoting sun symbolism and everything else. And so essentially what I've seen, according to my research and who I've been reading and everything else, there has been a major, major shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And some deities got lumped into all of that. So some deities that are considered solar today were actually polar way, way, way back when. But now modern people
Hmm.
have no idea or concept about polar anything, basically,
You know what
because
pops
it's a
into
whole
mind?
campaign.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Oh,
when
go
you
ahead.
said that, when you talk about the deities that are considered solar, they were actually polar. The first name that pops into my mind is Apollo. Apollo is of the sun, right, for Greek mythology, but pole is in his name. So that's interesting.
Well, even Apollo, so there's a variant of Apollo called Hyperborean Apollo. And Apollo actually has connections to the north. So that's one of the things that's really fascinating here is that a lot of these deities have a northern connection. And if we live on a flat plane, the north would be the symbolic center,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least, what a lot of ancient cultures consider to be the symbolic center. And so, what you'll find, exactly to your point, that's a really, really excellent point. A lot of solar deities, when you really look into their history and early mythology, they're more polar in nature, or they derive their power from the North Pole, or their sort of mentor was polar, something along these lines. This is the case with Jesus too, and most people today see him as a sun symbol, but he was a follower of Saint John, and Saint John and a lot of figures that are kind of considered to be like the wild man sort of archetype. A lot of these figures are polar in nature with everything that they do. St. John always walked with a walking stick. The walking stick or the staff is a pole,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of these figures have that pole. The pole is one of the oldest symbols ever, right? And so some people have referred to it as the mystic pole tradition, basically. And so there's actually a lot more books about all of this stuff than I realized too. When I first started getting into it, I was unaware that this is like a thing that you can follow and track and read like a ton about, actually. And so people have, referred me to all sorts of different books and authors and have sent me PDFs. And I've talked to authors who have written about this kind of stuff. But geocentrism, it plays a huge, huge role in really understanding a lot of what these people are talking about, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me because this world is all we know. So of course, why wouldn't we be focused on it? you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I kind of see heliocentrism as a thing where just like the sun, the rays of the sun, it's expansive. So the rays emanate away from the sun. Things that are polar actually go back to the center. And so that's kind of a whole entire aspect here as well. So even
Well,
what I've
they go
learned
both
is that,
ways, right? If you're talking about a pole, like if an electromagnetic pole, it's reciprocal. It goes out, it goes around, and then it comes back in.
right, 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 exactly. Yep, totally. So like one of the earliest rituals that humanity, has been seen doing like over and over and over and over again is revolving around a central totem. So people go to Mecca, right? And they go
Mm-hmm.
around the Kaaba cube 7 times. They're
Mm-hmm.
going counterclockwise 7 times. There's a lot of native groups where they have some sort of idea like this too, going around a central fire, going around the maypole is another example.
Mm-hmm.
In voodoo, it's not uncommon for there to be what's called a potomaton, which is a central pole in their temple. And they literally acknowledge this pole as being the navel of the universe. That's how they interpret it, right? Because it's the world axis,
Yeah.
basically. And so, whether you go counterclockwise or clockwise, Freemasonry has rituals that are very similar to this as well. But whether you go counterclockwise or clockwise, that means a kind of a world of difference depending on who you talk to. A clockwise rotation is more expansive, and so you're actually moving away symbolically from the pole. Counterclockwise is more polar, and you're actually going towards the pole. And so the stars, the fixed stars, go counterclockwise, right? So you're going more towards the center of the pole, symbolically. Our clocks go clockwise, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
more expansive, it's more solar. And then we have the 12 numbers on the face of a clock, which the number 12 is a solar number as well. That's why you have 12
Right.
signs of the zodiac and things like that, 12 disciples and whatnot. And so once you can kind of see what solar symbolism looks like, it's all over the modern world. That to me is sort of the paradigm or construct that most people are living in today.
Well, right, but and that's what they want. They want people to think that the sun is the center of the universe and everybody's going and so on and so forth. And it sort of just pushes that whole expansive,
Yes.
Big Bang, whatever nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. It's always away from self. You're always looking for external validation. You're always looking for external answers. Nothing is local. You're concerned about things that are happening that are completely outside of your control and whatnot. So I see it as kind of like you're giving away your power. In the solar paradigm, most people are kind of giving away their power to everything else, authority, figures and things like that. And so that's why one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about polar symbolism is because it brings you actually back to self. It actually brings you closer to home, with things that you can actually sort of control. And I think that this is how people in sort of primordial ages actually operated. They were way more concerned with what was happening local to them, and
But
they
that makes sense.
oftentimes, I'm sorry, come again?
I just said, but that makes sense.
Right?
You
Oh,
should be
yeah.
concerned with what's happening local to you because that's what you have direct influence over. It's what your family is surrounded by. That's how people should be focused, I think.
Exactly. Exactly. Definitely. And in my most optimistic of times, I think that we might swing back there, and at the very least, there are individuals and communities, that are kind of swinging back, with this mentality and this mindset and everything else. Um, one of the other things too, just with this circumambulation sort of business, is that what they're doing is they're mirroring what's happening in the heavens. They're mirroring the fixed stars, going around the pole star. And what I've kind of come to understand is that the logic was that if that's good enough for the heavens, if this is sort of the pattern that we can see in the night sky, then this is good enough for us. And so in this primordial era, people lived in more circular sort of structures and stuff. So literally their homes were more circular. Oftentimes the home had a central fire, and this would be like the heart of the home. And I've literally
Like
read it in
teepees.
some of my books. I'm sorry, what was that?
Like teepees. I'm just starting to think
Yes,
of like ancient old
exactly.
structures that are around, like a
You got
teepee
it.
is around, and then also, and I was just talking with Rose about this the other day. Go Bekli Tepe, like
Yeah,
that. What is allegedly the most ancient civilization? It was very circular. Like there's, you know,
you got it. Exactly right. Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah.
interesting.
And so I've read in some books that literally that central fire was symbolic of the North Star, because a lot of people had this idea that the stairway to heaven, the pillar to heaven, this gateway to the other side was at the north, basically, that it was the northern sky. And this has been backed up by so many different things that I've come across, and it makes so much more sense for so many different reasons. I still find it to be like very, very novel. But yeah, whether it was actually like a teepee or their structure that was circular and having that central sort of fire, or it was literally their village. A lot of older villages you'll find they were more circular in nature.
Hmm.
And oftentimes there was like a central totem, or there was a central temple, or there was a standing stone, or there was a world tree, or something along these lines. But being at the center is emblematic of that pole star, that North Star. That was considered to be the guiding star. And a lot of the stars in the northern sky were referred to as eternal stars, imperishable stars. They were considered to be the oldest stars, basically. And it's because of their stillness, their relative stillness compared to the rest of the night sky. That's why they kind of had that symbolic sort of association. And what I've come across too is that the oldest deities come from the north. I see it that even the planets, as old as they are, Saturn and Mars and Venus and things like that, they are actually kind of a newer tier of God. And I would even say that the sun is a newer tier of God. And all you have to do too is look at some of the myths associated with the sun. It's always associated with like youthfulness and things like that. The sun card in the tarot, you usually see like a baby. It'll be either two children in front of a brick wall, or it'll be like a baby on a horse, right? And so the sun is a newer deity. The northern gods, the northern stars, the North Star, this is some of the oldest gods you can come across, basically. And this is all in the world of occultism, too, by the way. That's probably one of the more surprising things to me, is seeing that a lot of occult groups actually have this sort of understanding as well. But they're not geocentric, they're not flat earthers, so they're missing like this huge piece to the puzzle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Because I feel like there's a lot you miss. There's a lot of connections that you miss, that you don't connect if you believe you live on a globe and that sort of thing.
Right.
It really it's and I've said this for a long time, that it's like the ultimate way to disconnect you from like everything, from the creator, from the creation. It's like you don't know where you are. There is no up or down, It's like,
Yes.
it's everything is just, it's like the foundation for all lies. So, yeah,
It's totally
absolutely.
true. Oh my God. I know. That's why I'm so excited to give this presentation, because I don't have to hold back. And
Right.
I'm going to be amongst like-minded people who already have an understanding of this stuff. And so to me, honestly, it's such a huge gift to be able to do this. And it's a huge gift for people to have this sort of awareness already and to talk about it symbolically. Like they're going to get a lot out of, what I'm going to present to people, because they're not going to have to break all of these previous spells that they have. They're already there. They're going to a flat earth conference already,
Right,
you know,
right.
so they're already on board with it. And
Yeah.
so, I do tarot readings for people. I do study sessions and consultations with people about symbolism and astrology and things like that. And one of the things that's always a delicate sort of thing to talk about is this stuff. But it has to come out, because when I tell them, I'm like, if you really want to know like sort of the esoteric like implications of some of these symbols, you have to realize that the people who created them lived in a different paradigm. And it wasn't with the sun being at the center of everything. It was a completely different ball game. We're talking about geocentrism. It wasn't that the earth was spinning, it's that the heavens were spinning. just like what you said too about there being like a real up and down. That is such an old understanding of things, that there was a universal up and a universal down.
Hmm.
It sounds very simple, but that meant everything, because we're talking about, in their eyes, a spiritual hierarchy, an actual sort of framework where there are literal realms above and then realms below. But all of these realms are universal. It doesn't matter where you're at in the world, or on earth rather. But of course, that's thrown out the window if, people believe that they live on a circular, spherical Earth that's spinning around. Suddenly, up and down becomes arbitrary.
Hmm.
But you're right. It's like this is at the core of so many different lies. It's absolutely unbelievable. So I really give credit to the flat Earth community for giving me, just this huge sort of leg up, as a symbolic researcher and decoder, because not a lot of people are really interested in symbolism, but then also, flat earthers or into geocentrism. But you're just going to miss a whole piece to the puzzle if you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm just curious. Are you religious at all? Do you subscribe to any religion? Were you raised religious at all?
I was raised in a Catholic family. Catholic Christian family was kind of split amongst, my cousins and aunts and uncles and things like that. But my parents weren't too strict with it, to be honest. So I don't consider myself to be a religious person. I really appreciate, though, a lot of symbolism related to all sorts of different religions. So like even the Abrahamic religions, for what they're worth, it's like I get value out of looking into Islam as an example, or Christianity
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot. So I try and just be open-minded, and I'm so interested in the symbolism that I'm willing to kind of read things from all over the place. But I can't say I'm religious. It's kind of the classic thing. I'm not really religious, but I'm deeply spiritual though.
Yeah, I kind of am the same way. I'm not religious either, and I didn't. I went to church a little bit when I was younger, and I grew up sort of in a Christian family. But my mom wasn't very strict about the church thing. Um,
Hmm.
so I never was really super heavy into it, and I didn't even really read the Bible except for what my grandma would read to me when I was little. But then it was like
Hmm.
after all of this, and seeing like things like the Bible and stuff being, argued, so like there'd be heated arguments about it, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the flat earth. And one time actually I was just out at like a local thing, like a little downtown little farmers market thing, and I just was talking to some random guy, and I just said, "Hey, anybody ever tell you the earth is flat?" Like I just figured I would just try to just flat smack somebody randomly. And he was
Yeah.
like, "Nah," and he was kind of going back and forth with me, and then I don't know what it was, but it popped into my head. I said, "The Bible says the earth is flat." And he goes, "Well, now you've got my attention. Where does it say that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's so funny because you never know what is going to be like somebody's
Mm.
doorway, right?" And so then I sort of realized, and then having Christian friends in flat Earth who are big into it, I sort of realized, well, maybe there's something to be in there. So I started reading it, and I do my Saturday streams usually where I read with Jack. We call it anti-religious scripture study, because we're not like trying to be Bible beaters or tell people they need to,
Mm.
get baptized or anything like that. We're just looking at the scriptures for what it says, and seeing what does it say and what does it mean stripped
Hmm.
down, just like what does it mean without adding to it or taking away from it, or like putting it through some like preacher's filter, where they'll say, I'm sure you've heard a lot of things where it says, now this scripture says blah, 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 blah. Now what that means is, and then they try to like tell you what it
Right.
means, but you're like, but that's not what it says. I think it means what it actually says.
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned from that too. And yeah, symbolism, and there's stuff that talked about in the Bible. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Like, there's alchemy in the Bible, and
Oh
there's
yeah.
like, all kinds of crazy stuff, necromancy, murders,
Oh
lies,
yeah.
deceit, like everything everything happens in the Bible. So I find it actually pretty interesting to read in that respect. It's like
Oh, definitely.
got more drama than most like any like fiction novel. It's real life. Is,
Right, right,
or
right.
historical,
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know.
No, I'm right there with you. The older I get, the more interested I am in it, to be honest with you. Reading the scriptures and things like that. What I've done up until now is there's certain storylines that I become interested in, as an example, and then I will read things based around that story or that figure or
Yeah.
what have you. So I haven't read the Bible from cover to cover or anything like that, and so I tend to follow sort of the weaves that interest me, the most. But there's always something that is relevant that I'm kind of curious about or looking into. Um,
Yeah, and I think
you
it's
know,
also interesting to see the sort of commonalities. I guess I don't know if that's referred to as syncretism, but the commonalities behind a lot of these ancient religions too is another good
yeah,
reason to look at it. Like they're all of them are geocentric. They all, you know, Earth is the center, like really
right,
when you get down to it, that's it. And even some of the creation
yeah.
stories where they aren't like word for word exact, they're very similar, and I just find that really fascinating.
For sure, for sure. No, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I think too. It's like this is center stage, in my opinion. And so it makes way more sense that this is the case. It seems like a lot of the propaganda and the conditioning that modern people are kind of, especially in the West, are subjected to. It's like it's all, in an effort to convince you that you're not divine. Everything's random, everything's chaotic, everything's dead, so yeah. Have you seen? I'm sure you have. I remember seeing it years ago where it was a Muslim guy talking to like his people and he was talking about geocentrism and a flat earth sort of model and the earth being stationary. You've come across that before, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole entire thing. I remember seeing it years ago, but the more and more I learn about things, the more I'm seeing that Islam, especially esoteric Islam, has a lot of geocentrists in it. And there is a lot of information in that world that is completely polar in nature. There's authors that explicitly talk about all of this stuff basically, but through the lens of Islam. And it's really, really fascinating to me. So I see it that between all of the Abrahamic religions, like that is the polar religion. That is like the polar geocentric religion. I'm not saying that most people there are or are in it understand that. That's for sure not the case. But you're going to find more information just underneath the surface of their mainstream sort of like authors and everything else, where they have a lot of this information completely still intact, which has been a huge surprise to me personally. I don't know if I was expecting to see that or not. But over the years, that's something that I've really, really picked up a number of times over that this is sort of the thing. And even when you look at their pilgrimage thing with the Kaaba in Mecca, they're basically treating that as almost like that's their symbolic north, pretty much. That's their symbolic North Pole. That's their point of orientation. And what I've realized is that the North Pole and the Pole Star being along the line of the world axis, that has everything to do with orientation. And so it has to do with orienting yourself in this place and wanting to know where the center is. This is something that primordial man, I think, was kind of concerned with was what's the center of this domain? What's the center of my home? There's even a science called centrography where people try and find the center of their country or their island or their village or something along these lines. And oftentimes the center was once again marked with a sort of totem, a temple or rock or a tree or something along these lines. And what I've read is that this is basically kind of like almost baked into our DNA to want to find the symbolic center of things. But that all of these locations that people consider to be at the center of the world are secondary centers. They're secondary locations. The primary center really is, to me, at the North Pole, basically. and that place is so mysterious that you're never really going to get there, and so this is something that I've come across many times over, is that this primary center becomes basically etheric in nature. That I don't know if it's an actual place that you can actually literally visit. I don't know if it works quite like that. I know there have been people over the years that have tried to make trips to the North Pole and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But it seems to me like it's one of these things where it's just out of reach. It may be non-physical or something along these lines, but that a lot of people too, they say that paradise was at the north, the Garden of Eden was at the north, all of these sort of different ideas. And so when people have sort of their center of the world, and that is their pilgrimage location, they are actually mirroring the original location. They're actually kind of using that as a blueprint of sorts. So when people go to the Kaaba cube, that is their symbolic north. That is their symbolic point of orientation. That is their point of pivot. That's where people pray towards. If you're Muslim, you're going to pray towards the Kaaba cube 5 times a day, no matter where
Right.
you're at in the world. So you're treating that as basically your world axis. But this is a secondary center. The original center is in a different location, based on my research and sort of how I tend to look at everything.
Well, I mean, everything revolves around the center.
That's it. That's it.
So it's to me, it's like that's the most interesting spot. Did you know that there's no treaty keeping people out of the North Pole like there is for Antarctica? There's an Antarctic treaty, but
Mm.
there's nothing like that for the North Pole. There's no like law written down where you can't go there. But
Right, right. Yeah, no, I don't think I knew that actually.
yeah, there isn't. But there's a heavy military presence in the north.
Mm. Hmm.
Heavy military presence in the north and all around it. But there's no law saying you can't go there. I find that
Mm.
interesting. And I also find it interesting with all of the old maps that have the four islands in the center. And
Yeah.
some of those maps they have a lot of written text on them. They're very detailed. They're describing to you the inhabitants of these islands, what time of the month, like there's only certain times of year you can get to these islands when the openings open up. So, I mean, it's
Mm.
like it's very specific. And then it turns into then over time it turns from islands to just a big chunk of ice cap. And now there's nothing there. Now they just they even got rid of the fake ice cap. So
Right, right.
yeah,
Wow.
it's very
Yeah, no,
interesting.
the poles are, I mean, such a fascinating discussion, right? Especially the North Pole for me personally. And so does it literally take you to other places? Is it an opening of some sort? Like I said, is it more etheric or spiritual, sort of in nature? Um, there's so many different myths about a central mountain, right? The Sometimes it's called the lodestone, which is
Mm-hmm.
like why people say the magnets, or sorry, compasses point there. That it's magnetic, or that it's the world tree is there, or that there's like a sacred city that's there as well. That's kind of another sort of idea that's been sort of thrown out there.
Yeah, I
But
think
I
that
think just
tree
like what you're
idea.
saying.
I think that tree idea it relates to the pole. It's like the idea of a toroid, right, with the
Hmm.
the hyperboloid in the center, right? So
Yeah,
you have your
exactly.
0 point. It goes up from there and then down, just like a tree growing, and then its roots. Like so, for
That's
me,
it.
whenever people talk about the world tree, I'm thinking that's what they're thinking. That's just like
Yeah.
it's an allegory for that. I don't know if I don't know what to call it, like a master, the main field, the main magnetic field, because I don't think there's just one. Everything's got a field. The sun's got a field. The moon's got a
Yeah.
field, and it's
Right.
basically how all of these things interact together with their unseen forces, right? With their field. So it's just,
Right.
I just think it's like they're just sort of referring to the main one, the world one, the main one that drives maybe the
Yes.
clock, the luminaries in the sky. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. 100%. Yeah. So that's how I see it too. And there's a reason why the world tree is nearly like a universal sort of myth. Like every culture has some sort of tree that they hold, like, in high regard. because it's the ultimate unifying sort of thing. If it's a real world tree and there is one central trunk to everything and there is a center to everything, literally, just like the torus field, the center, when you get into center symbolism, it's the point of emanation. So it's from which everything emanates, but then it's also the point that everything also returns to, right? Just like a torus
Yes.
field.
It's
Yeah,
also the point that everything returns to. Yes.
right.
I think
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
key. I think that's key. This
For
is
sure.
it's a, like we live in like it's like an enclosed reciprocal system. I
Yes.
feel like, the earth even recycles itself. Like we can't even all the stuff that we put out, the earth cleans all that out. I don't know what it does. Sometimes it takes longer than others. Like not that I'm saying we should just go dump everything everywhere, but when you're like looking like an example would be Chernobyl. They said, "Oh, it's been fried. You can never live there again." But like life is thriving there. It's just like, come on, you guys are lying to us about so much stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's absolutely crazy. But no, I'm right there with you. I'm sure you probably have the same opinion, but the idea that, humans can kind of like destroy Earth, like we've been shown so many different movies where like some villain destroys the Earth and the Earth is like splitting apart and like all these other things. And I just see it as the complete opposite. This is the most stable thing you will ever come across in your entire life. It's not going anywhere. And it's just it's going to be around perpetually forever, basically. And so to see images of it, though, kind of falling apart or being destroyed and all of these things blown up and whatever, it's conditioning you to think a certain kind of way. But yeah, right, too. There's this just self-regenerative sort of healing thing, just like the human body.
hmm
The human body, without even trying, it heals itself.
Yeah, you just got to get out of the way.
You just got exactly
Get out of
right.
the way.
Yep. 100%, 100%. Um, so yeah, I'm passionate about the polar thing because it relates to the center. And the way I see it, it's like when you connect to your center, that's how you connect to all centers, basically. It gets into the idea of know thyself and you'll know the universe sort of thing. Um, that actually all planes of existence are connected via this center, via this world axis. And so that's how you commune with the cosmos is by going to your center, by going to that sort of still point within. Because what we're really dealing with too is these layers of existence, in my opinion. I think the wheel kind of is like an appropriate metaphor. It's the axle of the wheel, right?
hmm
Going to the axle of your wheel is going to the still point within, and being at the sort of circumference of the wheel, that's more so related to multiplicity. It's related to division. It's kind of like the hamster wheel sort of thing going through the motions, right? But if you go to the center point within, you become what's referred to as like the unmoved mover. And sometimes the center is called the invariable middle. But this is where you're kind of in the center and you're kind of just observing things sort of happening around you. But this axle connects all realms above and below together. Sometimes it's been referred to as this relationship between heaven and earth and man as the great triad, and that we actually are what connect and separate all that is above with all that is below. And so there's a lot of different like um tarot cards and like deities and things like that. I'm thinking of like Baphomet. Baphomet has like one finger up and one finger down.
hmm
Magician, he has his wand pointed up to the sky and then he has one hand pointed down to the ground. Um, that card corresponds with the number one, right? This is the axis. That is the trunk of the world tree. The number one is just a world axis polar symbol, in my opinion, because it's ultimate unification, right? Just like the axle of the wheel. That is the reconciliation of opposites, the axle of the wheel. And so this is, where everything is unified, basically. And so man plays an important role in the relationship between heaven and earth. So again, we connect and separate the above and the below. The world axis, when you get into its symbolism, that's basically what it does as well. It's like a pole, basically, going back to pole symbolism. So a pole, like in a tent, what does it do? It's keeping the canopy away from the ground so that there's actually space for things to kind of be, within the tent itself. The world axis, one of the ideas that I've read about it is that there's an old understanding that heaven and earth were fused together and that all of the elements were fused together. But it wasn't until a world axis came to be, or a column, a central column, that's another metaphor for the world axis, that there was actually separation between heaven and earth. And so with this pole, with this axis, there is now separation between heaven and earth. Now there's actually space for the elements to kind of mix and do their thing. And now there's actually space for us to kind of do stuff. Um, so even the magician, he's acting as the central pillar in the house of God, basically. Um, the mountain is very much related to pillar symbolism. The pyramid is related to pillar symbolism. The tree also is just like a perfect interface for pillar symbolism.
Well, the pyramid, or the pyramid, or in the crystal world, it would be referred to as half of an octahedron. Octahedral shape is a shape that magnetite and other naturally ferrous materials grow in. Did you know that?
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, see, this is why I'm gonna enjoy talking to you, because like my whole thing is I've been looking at, the world of crystals and like this realm and
Oh,
how it works. So like we really do live in a very magical place. Like
we do.
I like agree with what you're saying. Like we live in this very unique place where the unseen forces, like the immaterial meets with the material, right? Because
Yes.
we've got the material and the immaterial interacting here on a daily basis all the time, and it's just like when Tesla, there's a quote from Tesla saying, if scientists would start studying the unseen as much as they study the seen, then they would move
Hmm.
forward like drastically. I mean, that's not exactly what he
Exactly.
said, but something to that effect. Like they would learn so much more if they start studying these
Right.
unseen forces, and like what
Oh
you're
yeah.
saying, like the magician acting as the pole for the world,
Hmm.
for me, magic relates to magnetic, and
Yes.
so it's like these things where, things can seem to happen on their own, like when two objects that are magnetic draw themselves together or push themselves apart with these unseen forces, you know,
That's it.
and
Oh yeah.
and they never, and we don't get taught in depth very much about this type of stuff in school. Like my science classes didn't talk to me very much about magnetism or electricity or polarity or stuff like that. A little bit, but I really don't remember that being a big deal. And I feel like, that's just part of the design. They want you focusing on counting the beans and the physical, putting a physical number on everything and quantifying everything, instead of understanding that this place is not obligated to conform to our numbers and our number system, and be counted, right? Like there's things that just can't be counted. There's things that can't be quantified. And it's a huge part of understanding how this place works.
Oh my goodness. 100%. No, I'm right there with you. Exactly. Even some of my favorite authors, what they say is that basically, if you're talking about true metaphysics, that you're talking about the center of all that is, and the center is everywhere. So one of the interesting things that I've come across is that when you study symbolism, like I like to use the dot as an example of just like the simplest sort of shape, the simplest sort of sigil or whatever you can kind of come across. Doesn't get too much simpler than a dot. But that the dot in and of itself, it not only represents the center of all that is, the point of expression of everything from which everything emanates, but then also returns to, but then it also represents the totality of everything as well. So on one hand, the dot is the center of this domain, or you, if you want to say the universe or cosmos, you can say that, but it's also the cosmos itself. And so many symbols work this way. So even like the tree example, on one hand, it's the center of everything, but if you use it from a world tree perspective, it is also everything as well, because everything's within that torus field, right? And so I really appreciate some authors right now that are talking about, if you're talking about pure metaphysics, it goes beyond numbers. It's almost like numbers don't play an aspect into pure metaphysics because it's beyond quantifying anything. It's non-quantifiable, just like what you're saying, pretty
Hmm.
much. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense personally, that there is an aspect to this domain that is beyond quantity. It's beyond just counting these beings. It's not something you can actually measure. It's literally pure spirit. It's pure spirit, and so it operates in a completely different way. And so this idea too that the center literally is everywhere, I think is really interesting as well. So that's why I'm passionate about it too, is like when you understand it, there is a symbolic, actual, like, kind of literal center along the line of the world axis or the center of this domain or whatever you want to say. But that center is literally within everything as well. It's kind of, I don't like to use the word quantum personally, but I think people would understand it's like a quantum sort of dynamic, right? So it permeates everything, or maybe ether is maybe a better sort of word to kind of use that way, or spirit being a better word for that. It permeates anything and everything here. So everything has a center as well. If you draw a shape, if you're thinking of a star, if you're thinking about sort of anything, there is like a symbolic center, or there's like a symbolic sort of core there. Um, and it all relies on sort of this polar principle, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so cool. I like that you're into tarot too. I love tarot stuff. I got a lot of tarot decks. I don't really talk about it so
Oh yeah.
much anymore, but yeah, I like to look at all that stuff too because it's the symbolism. Cami and I talk a lot about that stuff too, privately. you know, uh,
Gotcha. That's
but
awesome.
that'll be
One
good.
one of the things I just have to mention just real quick, if you don't mind, but one of the things with the tarot is it encodes so much information. You like it continues to blow my mind. Um,
Oh,
so as I was
the
saying,
high priestess in the tarot is holding the Torah.
right. Oh yeah. Oh totally. Yeah.
That's my cover
She's
for my
also
anti-religious scripture study thing. We have the high priestess holding the Torah.
she's also the central pillar. That's another thing to look for in the tarot is the central pillar is that pillar of transcendence. It is the center of the world tree. It's the trunk of the world tree. It's the world axis basically. But what I've been tracking is polar to solar symbolism and this sort of major switch that happened over time. And you actually see this in the tarot. So when you're looking at some Freemasonic tracing boards, they'll have three pillars, oftentimes, or two pillars. Oftentimes, there's one pillar that has a sun on it, and there's another pillar that has a moon on it. But then there's another pillar. So what is the third pillar? If it's there, sometimes it's just implied or sometimes it's invisible. But if there's a solar pillar and a lunar pillar, what's that third pillar all about? That third pillar is polar. So you have a solar pillar, a lunar pillar, and then you have a polar column right there in the middle.
Hmm.
And oftentimes the polar column is the what transcends to the heavens. It's just like Jacob's ladder or the world axis or stairway to heaven. But this central pillar oftentimes has like the all-seeing eye on top of it. I did a whole presentation called Illuminati Symbolism, and I get into the idea that the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, is a polar symbol, basically, like so many of our symbols are polar. It opens up a whole sort of dynamic that is so much more easier to understand, in my opinion, if you have sort of the ability to kind of go there with everything. And so I see it that we live in a solar age, and there was a time that I think was kind of like a transitional time that was more lunar based. But previous to the lunar age, there was the polar age. All three of these ages have different sky clocks. In the solar age, it's astrology, the path of the sun, the ecliptic, the idea that the sun is the center of everything. In the lunar age, it was all about the moon. And so there's still some cultures that follow just lunar calendar, so like Judaism and Islam, like their holy
Mm-hmm.
days fall on lunar cycles, basically. But previous to that, it was polar symbolism. It was the polar age. So it was the pole star and the circumpolar constellations that go around the pole star, basically, Ursa Major and Minor. Um, wouldn't you know it, it's interesting. In the tarot, you have the star card, the 17th card of the major arcana. It's the pole star. It is the star of stars. It's the guiding star. It's the central star. It is the pole star, which has a lot of feminine goddess symbolism associated with it as well. So, what do you generally see? A woman at night among the stars. It's not uncommon for that central star to have seven stars around it. just like Ursa Major, the seven stars of Ursa Major. These were the original seven stars of enlightenment. A lot of that symbolism, these original seven stars, that symbolism got transferred over to the seven planets. I'm pretty convinced of that, and there's a lot of evidence to kind of suggest that.
Seven's a
That
very
that
esoteric number. It's very important, even in scripture.
exactly,
It
yeah,
means oath.
100%. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like the number of this realm or something.
Yeah.
you know and then that card is followed by the moon card, right? And that card is followed by the sun card, and on the sun card, once again, you have a child. So to me, I see these cards as encoding information about these three major ages, and actually these three different sky clocks, pretty much from a polar primordial goddess sort of worship and reverence to now solar, the sun, the child, and all these different types of things. More of a patriarchal sort of thing is associated with it as well. So I see these three cards in a row kind of encoding a lot of information that we're kind of talking about today.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
But
Huh.
yeah, I love the tarot, man. I mean, I still get a lot out of it. I mean, I've been looking into it for years and years and years, and it kind of is really inspiring and kind of mind blowing whenever you come across something new that you've never noticed before, but is completely relevant and has a ton of things sort of associated with it. So it's one of my foundations, definitely.
Yeah, you're making me want to go look through the decks again because I haven't for a while. And sometimes, if you don't look at for something for a while and you go back to it, you're like, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. So now I want to go look.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So Mario, why don't you tell people where they can find you, all your socials, your website, anything and everything?
Yeah, for sure. So once again, symbolicstudies.com is where people can find links to everything. I mentioned it during our chat here. I do tarot readings and consultations for people if they're interested. I have a number of students that I meet with on a regular basis, and a lot of people want to learn more about astrology or the tarot. Polar symbolism is something that a number of people have reached out to learn more about too. If they want to learn more about this perspective, I have some presentations that people should check out. I have a presentation that I put out maybe a couple months ago called The Pleiadians, and I talk about the Pleiades constellation within Taurus, the seven sisters, right? These seven stars. I talk about how a lot of the symbolism associated with those stars actually came from Ursa Major. It's a remnant of this polar to solar sort of switch. And when people became more heliocentric, they had a different idea of where the stairway to heaven is, this axis, right? Um, and so I think that's an interesting presentation for people to check out. I also re-released a presentation about solar symbolism called The Rising Sun, Esoteric Solar Symbolism. And I talk about how solar symbolism isn't exactly what you probably think it is. And I get into some of this stuff, this idea of the sun having a polar sort of origin symbolically. I'm pretty convinced of that as well. So people can check that stuff out. And then I do have a Patreon if people want more information about the tarot and things like that. I have exclusive videos up there. But otherwise, yeah, I think that'll do it. Thanks for having me on. I had a good time, and I'm really looking forward to the conference. This is going to be really fun, and
Yeah.
this presentation is going to be like pretty significant. So I'm putting kind of everything into it.
Oh, I'm so excited. Well, I bought new equipment, so everybody's gonna get recorded in like 4K or something ridiculous like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. We're gonna do lots of documenting and interviews and stuff, and so yeah, I'm really looking forward to meeting you and talking with you further at the event and stuff. So thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for
Oh yeah,
agreeing to be part of Flattoberfest. I think everybody's really going to enjoy your presentation. So that's going to be
for
awesome.
sure. Right on. Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. All right. Everybody, his link's in the description, by the way, if you want to check out his website and his channel, and you definitely should. So all the links are there. And thanks again. All right. Take care, everybody.
See ya.